Hi, everyone, and welcome back from our intermission. Thank you so much for tuning in to day one of PsychedelX 2026. My name is Bianca Watt. I am the lab manager and a research coordinator for psychedelic clinical trials at the Social Neuroscience and Psychotherapy Lab, as well as the director of PsychedelX 2025 and 2026. Up next, we have our second keynote speaker, Alyssa Gursky. I'm so excited to introduce them. Alyssa Gursky, LPC, is a psychedelic art therapist and researcher, splitting their time between Portland, Oregon, and Brooklyn, New York. They own Psychedelic Art Therapy LLC, offering creative and somatic approaches to individuals and groups exploring non-ordinary states of healing. They are trained in ketamine, MDMA, and psilocybin-assisted therapy. They are a researcher at the Social Neuroscience and Psychotherapy Lab. They were a lead therapist on an MDMA-assisted group therapy trial with transgender adults and a co-therapist on psilocybin trials for major depressive disorder. They co-founded the Psychedelic Art Therapy Network to build community and create scholarly discourse. They teach internationally on psychedelics, healing, and creativity. Today, they will be presenting their talk, Beyond the Artist, Rethinking Creativity and Healing. Thank you so much, Alyssa, for joining us today, and please take it away.
Hi, thank you so much, Bianca. It's a joy to be here with you. Let's get this all full screen. How's that? Can everybody see everything?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, perfect. So, as Bianca said, my presentation is entitled Beyond the Artist, Rethinking Creativity in Psychedelic Healing. Bianca just did a pretty thorough job at my introduction, so I'll keep this brief so we can get into the good stuff. The only additional things that feel important or special to add are I received my bachelor's and my master's from Naropa University, focusing on transpersonal psychology and counseling in both of my degrees. And while I was at Naropa, I co-led the Naropa Alliance for Psychedelic Studies. So to be offering a keynote at an organization that uplifts students in their academic and public voices, it just feels very full circle because without that position, I would not be here. So there are a lot of things that come into an individual's head when they think about art, creativity, art therapy, and we'll spend some time unpacking that. Something that Bianca said, our logo here, I co-founded the Psychedelic Art Therapy Network with my colleagues, Rebecca Wilkinson and Katie Bragagnolo. And through that, I have started having more interactions with other psychedelic art therapists, which has given me an array of understanding of how we are currently using creativity and art making in psychedelic care. Some of those ways are including in the prep, experiential, and integration portions of treatment, art as a diagnostic tool for our own clinical understanding, supervision. And I'm hoping that by the end of this 45-minute, 50-minute talk that y'all will see ways that you can use it as well. I co-authored a peer-reviewed paper with Rebecca Wilkinson on psychedelics and art therapy, and a book chapter in a book called Queer World Making in Art Therapy, focusing on psychedelic therapy. So I come to this dialogue of creativity from a lot of clinical grounding. What feels important to me about this talk is that it's not just based in where I usually have been based, which is theory. How does this theoretically make sense? What I'm really interested and having a dialogue about is how does this fit in our real world? How does this fit out of trials, out of therapy? How do people actually embody and understand what a creative identity can mean for well-being in the current socio-political landscape that we find ourselves in? I tend to use art making and creativity a bit interchangeably, but I really wanted us all to be on the same page, like language semantic wise. So a parallel that I often use to describe art making to creativity is meditation is to mindfulness as art making is to creativity. You can be a mindful person and not have a meditation practice, but a meditation practice is a surefire way of developing a mindful state of consciousness. Conversely, art making is not the only way that you can be creative, but it is a direct way of cultivating creative consciousness. So for those of you who don't identify as artists and are graciously tuning in, hopefully that widens. That's really what I hope to be doing today. It's just widening the idea of inclusion. So, and the last thing I really want to say about this too is it's a transferable skill. So by working on a creative project, for example, you might be using a certain amount of distress tolerance, patience, tolerating ambiguity, holding challenging feelings. And practicing that in the creative sphere is going to impact how you show up in other areas of your life, whether it's relationships, work, etc. In the same way that having a mindfulness and meditation practice, people often report that it does positively benefit other areas of their lives. I read this quote recently by Brian Eno that really encapsulated what I wanted to communicate. So he says, stop thinking about artworks as objects and start thinking about them as triggers for experiences. What makes a work of art good for you is not something that is already inside it, but something that happens inside of you. And so that widens, right? It continues to widen the definition of it can just simply be something that evokes an experience. And what happens in that expansion, and I often think about, because I have a very intersectional approach to writing and therapy, I want y'all to sit with the question of who benefits from us having a narrow view. And we'll return to that throughout the day, but I just felt that this Brian Eno quote sent us in the right direction. So to really unpack what art means, we're going to break it down into three axes: who, what, and what it does. Who can make it? What counts as art? And what it does to a body. Brief technical difficulty. Okay. So the invitation is to unlink it from the artist's identity and really, throughout the three examples I'm about to go through, looking at the full scope of this basic human function, being creativity. So starting with axis one of who can make it. The photo that you'll see on the right-hand portion of the screen, I had seen while going on a walk in Portland, Oregon, and it actually ended up becoming the image that set me on the whole trajectory of this presentation. Why is it important to start to have dialogues of art, not just as a fun, playful thing, but how can it help us in this moment where there is so much stress, oppression, disconnection, etc. What really struck me about this piece of art was a couple of things. One, this individual needed very little to create. Often a barrier that I hear people say is, well, I don't have the right supplies or something of that nature. So how this person took an experience of systematic and systemic failure, failing them, into something that really presents as emotionally evocative this piece sat with me to the point, so there was no name, no artist. And in honor of this artist, I researched some organizations and donated that help women, people who bleed, get access to sanitary products. So I left those websites below in case anyone else is moved and would like to support this particular systemic failure. But when we explore who can make it, you don't need, I mean, the hope is the answer is all can make it. And particularly, one other thing that stood out to me about this piece of art is the transference of emotional labor that happens. I didn't have to have direct contact with this individual to be affected by the piece, but I really thought through the process that can be very demoralizing of an individual having to advocate for this vulnerable need. And a benefit of this piece of art being made is that this individual gets to confront and impact people while getting to separate. So just in this cultural way, seeing how this person needed very little and they got to externalize a deep source of overwhelm, pain, oppression, and frustration. Looking at axis number 2, what counts as art? This last week, I took a trip to this museum in the Hudson Valley called the Dia Beacon, and it's a gorgeous, they have amazing art if you ever are in just 90 minutes north of New York City. But there was an exhibition focusing on an artist named Te Ching Xie. Yeah, Xie. And what stood out to me is Xie really blurred the boundary between art and life. What he did over the course of decades of a creative practice as a, what did I say, an endurance, a durational performance artist. He spent 1 year living completely outside, as I've depicted here, 1 year rope tied to another human. You can even see how seriously he takes it with this, signed contract on our left. But some people on the surface might not consider what one person does for an entire year to be a work of art, but he created the structure where it was. So what counts as art? If we're going back to the definition of it being an emotionally evocative experience, I found this evocative, the devotion that it takes to stay connected to a person. And you can see on the very bottom it says, "We will never touch each other during the year." They are so close and yet so far. And the idea, can devotion be a form of creativity? His life itself was the work. And the third axis here of what art can do to the body. Also at the Dia Beacon, there was some art by Richard Serra. And what Serra does is he creates these larger than life metal structures. And while I was, walking through, meandering through this large maze, I noticed how much the shift in scale, me getting to feel small, was in itself an ordinary state. As an adult, we don't, or I personally don't often get the experience of feeling small and not having it being overwhelming. For example, being in a city like New York, it's easy to feel like one of many, but to have this unique axis of spaciousness yet tiny was moving. So playing with scale is often something that I'll talk to clients about. If something feels really big, can we make some art that makes it small? If something feels small and you want to grow it, build it larger. So while some might question, is a large piece of metal art? And coming back to that, what feeling does it evoke? That being an axis of what is considered art as well. Talking about the shared, so bringing this back to psychedelics more formally, I love the expression, they open the same door but with two keys. Creativity and psychedelics are both, to quote Rebecca and myself, art making and psychedelics both circumvent cognitive defenses and disrupt our default modes of thinking. They soften beliefs, and they can promote neuroplasticity, psychological flexibility, loosen rigid beliefs, and empowering alternatives of beliefs around creativity and oneself can emerge. So my insight here comes from being eye to eye on the ground in session with people of what are the recurrent barriers that I hear from colleagues, from friends, from clients around what's in the way of them and having some iteration of a creative practice. So how we learn to step away. Creativity, creating gets crowded out. One very important variable is economic pressure. I don't know about you, but it's really hard to find time to be curious and creative if you are worrying about how you are going to pay for your groceries or if it is safe to be outside of your home. Another thing that crowds us out is psychological gatekeeping. And this can be interpersonal or intrapsychic. The idea of I'm not an artist, it won't be good enough. There just being some barrier between that's not for me, I'm not interested. And it's the identity, the ego, waiting to do one more class, doing the thing where you buy materials, get into a craft for a little bit and then abandon it once it feels challenging, waiting to do the next thing. That cycle that can happen of maybe something externally will bring me to life. And also looking on a large scale once more, the defunding and devaluing that I'll, I'm really just referring to the United States because that's where I have lived for my life and what system I'm most familiar with. But the defunding and devaluing of creative programs sends a message consciously and unconsciously to people that why would I prioritize that? It's no longer prioritized in my schools. If it's no longer prioritized as a formal way that you can support yourself. Going from the cultural to the individual, here are often the distortions that I hear that keep people small. Real artists are born, not made. It has to be beautiful to matter. I don't have time. I can only draw stick figures. And the permission when I believe we actually need. You don't need to be an artist to create art. You don't need to make something good to benefit from the act. And in fact, abolishing good and bad is so much of what I discuss with people in art therapy. And the permission that it's healing, that creativity in itself is integration, and that expression in and of itself is also medicine. In continuing to pull on what I see, I often see this false dialectic that I struggle deeply with, and I'm hoping to help deconstruct it in some way, where art is either for the elite, for the gallery world, for this expensive, exclusive, high end, or it is this archetype of the tortured genius. It is a hobby, right? It is a side hustle. It gets relegated to that. And what about the in-between? And what about the in-between? And I'm really wanting to invite in a social model where, one, we care about each other, that requires creativity not as a luxury or a pathology, but I often say it is like brushing my teeth to me. It is something that I do to keep myself well, and to keep my system in balance. So continuing with beliefs that gatekeep us. I notice that often people are asking the wrong thing. They're asking, what will others think? What's the gain? Is it profitable? What can I do with this? And what I want to invite you to ask is, how do I feel? What does this externalize? What am I interested in? What was hidden that now wants to be known? And pulling this back to psychedelics, something that can be lost, identified a real cost. The people who make art under the influence of a psychedelic might miss out on knowing themselves via their art, having a safe regression in service of the ego. And again, asking this question of who benefits from us relating to art from the lens of what will others think? What is the gain when we don't have this access to a form of regulation, a form of getting something out? So, pulling in to this centralized thesis, how do we shift? The cultural shift and what it means specifically for psychedelic therapy. Something that always feels very important to identify is that this is not new. My colleagues and I might be in this really pioneering stage of formalizing art therapy and psychedelic therapy, but the practice itself is not new. Indigenous communities have been using art and non-ordinary states of consciousness as a technology for eons. And another example, Joan Kellogg, uh, founding member of the lineage of art therapy, actually integrated in mandalas in early American psychedelic research. So there's the identification that we are utilizing tools that are what I would believe to be our birthright in practice. And at the same time, they've weaved in and out of psychedelic research, of psychedelic therapy, and we're formalizing it in a peer-reviewed and a structured way now, but by no means is it new. So a little bit more of the why through a lens of science. Why I keep saying things like how good it is for us, but what does that really mean? I did a little bit of a literature review to just pull out some of the whys that I found to be really important and that match where we are culturally in this moment, what could be needed. So lowering stress hormones, 45 minutes of art making, dropped cortisol in 75% of participants, and viewing art, not doing anything, just viewing it, lowered 22%. There are no skills required so long as you have sight. But then we get into the kinesthetic sensory, which can still be available. It engages biology. So it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, supports neuroplasticity, builds cognitive reserve, and once again, pathways similar to those targeted by meditation throughout the creative process. Something that I found particularly sweet. I'm a fourth generation textile manufacturer. I'm a knitter. I'm new in my journey, but deeply in love with it. And I read a study how individuals who do fiber arts lower their risk of dementia by some number that I do not remember, but the people who were actively textile manufacturers, knitters, crocheters, had lower experiences of dementia. So it helps us age. It protects our aging minds. And I find these to be relevant examples when the ego comes into play. When we get into the narrative of, oh, well, it's a hobby, it's not for me, I wouldn't be very good at that. It's quite literally something you can do on a regular basis that would support slowing down cognitive decline. And it eases stress and anxiety. And I don't know who isn't a little stressed or a little anxious in this current world. I'm sure that this is familiar to many of you who are here, and I still wanted to help us weave together why psychedelics help, and particularly where we have seen them be very parallel or what's the word I'm looking for? They amplify each other. Okay, fewer repetitions. Integration still takes repetition, but when an individual is in that reopened critical learning window, it takes fewer experiences of showing up and doing it for it to become habit pattern. Psychedelics help promote divergent thinking, so evoking novel ideas, opening and speeding up generative thought. Typically, psychedelics will decrease somebody's physical motor skill, but increase that creative imaginal. So less resistance we often find, softening internal process, increasing curiosity. Psychedelics help to disrupt habit. So by getting outside of our own habitual way of thinking and being, psychedelics give us an opportunity to see and do differently. Yeah, and that's seeing outside of ourself. That I mean, the word transpersonal literally means going beyond the self. So that process of being able to be outside of oneself to assess, for example, one's relationship with creativity. Usually I've found that at some point somebody got told that what they made wasn't good, or it was judged or criticized in some way. And where I've seen psychedelics help is really help people have that corrective experience of making art and being approached with curiosity. Currently, there's a bit of a fragmentation between the two. There's plenty of research that talks about creativity in psychedelics, but not a lot yet about art therapy. So treating creativity as a broad mental function versus a specific creative practice in itself. On the training front in the psychedelic sphere, programs often say to have art supplies, but rarely teach their use. I will say this is increasing. Art therapists earn a whole degree to do exactly that. So my colleagues and I really do try to find ways to practice what I believe is harm reduction, reducing harm of individuals being able to offer art making, but knowing where their edges are. So that's where we're currently developing, but I will also say medicinal mindfulness out of Boulder, Colorado. Allison McQueen and Daniel McQueen do a gorgeous job at weaving it into every bit of their training. So they are what I see as an awesome example of what it looks like to continue to integrate this in further for those who are interested. But a form of language that we often use in the art therapy world is process over product. And if I could have you walk away with anything today, that would surely be one of the top 5. That in order to really experience the benefit, if we focus on what is it like to do it versus what am I making when we exit the functionality of the object, that is where this open access definition that we've spent our time exploring today actually can become integrated in. So it's not a status, but a practice. The question is not, am I an artist? It is, what does making something help me access? Or what needs to be expressed? Sometimes for me, it'll just be something feels kind of off and I just need to get it out. Or it might be something feels really good. And instead of just enjoying it, I take a moment to make some art to help me anchor that, right? To give myself. Alex Gray has a gorgeous quote that I do not remember all of, but he refers to art as the crystallized passage that helps us find our way back to the expanded state of being. So it not even just beneficial for these times of overwhelm and stress, but also anchoring in things that I want to grow, right? That example of Richard Serra's giant pieces. What would it be like if my feeling confident got to take up that much space for myself? I strongly believe that a somatic approach is integral with the type of work that I practice. So what words can't reach, hands and color and form can. We're really landing here into after you've received a lot of idea, what might this look like going forward for you? So an invitation is to ask your body, like I was just saying, what do you want? What do you think? How would that look? Let it be unconscious and let it be body led. Do it again and again, and eventually you stop having to ask a question. It just comes up in the moment and you know what to do. And that's where that language of it becomes like brushing my teeth. That I do it because I know it's good for me in routine, so I don't have to think about it anymore. Yeah, so that again and again, the repetition and how much psychedelics help speed up how much of that repetition we need for something to become pattern. So where this actually fits, real use cases in the therapy room, on the street, and in your hands today. In the therapy room, art bridges the medicine experience and integration. Often what I do is encourage people, instead of giving structured prompts, which some art therapists do, and I think is awesome, but something that I love doing is helping people restore their sense of desire and intuition. So when we say a client-led approach, that is what I mean there. Is I have all of the options that are neatly set up for them to use, and I support them in either modeling or helping them find their what do I want? Because that axis of what do I want versus what do they think is a turning point in embodiment. Not even considering other, but just what am I drawn towards? In activism, the street sign that we talked about, the individual getting to be anonymous and express such huge feeling. And sketching, collaging, writing, moving without outcome. Reframing that to what does this help me feel? So getting back to that binary of how can we step so far away from is it good and come back to what does this actually help me feel? What does this externalize? On a practical level, where can this fit into your practice? I am fully aware that IPN has a wider audience that includes student researchers, psychedelic practitioners. So anyone in psychedelic work, I truly believe, can use creativity in some point in the process. And some examples of that might be for students, a way to stay engaged and regulate, getting different parts of your brain moving. I know when I had chapters and chapters and chapters to read, having a small sketchbook next to me just to help my brain do something else helped ground it in. And I have no proof of this, but I do think it helped me remember a lot more. Researchers and practitioners in the planning stage, how do you think out loud? Or do you start by writing out? What would it be like to actually integrate image making into your process of learning, of discovery, and communicating with your team? For practitioners, it can be a great way of rapport building, as we've said, and our Rebecca and my paper really goes into this, but there is a place for it really to fit in the preparation, experiential, and integration. So, uh, who is it for? If you are not an art therapist, learn from one. There's, of course, the creative process is not owned by art therapists, but it can be a really evocative tool. So, as much safety as there can be with knowing your zone of confidence, your zone of competence when offering it. But for your personal process, it is a lot safer to explore. But I have most definitely made breakthroughs just by taking a break from drafting a theoretical form and shifting to image making, really trusting the different parts of the brain that come online there. And you tell me, I'm so curious to hear from other people where you can fit art making anywhere into the preparation, experiential, planning, dreaming. I might be a tiny bit ahead of schedule here, but for the highest good, creativity is already yours. We're not here to make you feel like an artist. We're here to reclaim creativity as a tool for healing, integration, and resistance. Beyond the identity, beneath the doubt, this capacity is already yours. So I hope that invitation is a nourishing one. So from here, I can leave this up for a moment in case people want to learn more about the Psychedelic Art Therapy Network, in case people want to contact me in some way. But otherwise, I'd love to use the remainder of time. Anyone from IPN definitely chime in for what the Q&A has looked like, but I'm open to just about anything for our last 20 minutes.
Thank you, Alyssa, for sharing your talk with us. We do have a couple questions for you.
Okay, that's awesome.
Um,
Should I keep the PowerPoint up or can I take
you
it
can
down?
leave
What?
it, yeah, on
Cool.
your slide.
Okay.
So we have a couple questions that have came in. And so one of them, one of our audience members was wondering if you could share that quote you had mentioned at the beginning.
The Brian Eno quote?
I believe so, yes.
Oh, absolutely. I will. What would be the best way? Can I email it? Do you want me to just put it back up? You want me to read it again?
Yeah, you can put it back up would be
Okay.
great. I
Okay,
think they
let's.
wanted to write it down, so
Yeah, totally,
thank
totally.
you.
We can just leave it up while I answer other questions. It was okay. Now, okay. I went too fast.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love writing now.
Okay. And then we have another question here from one of our audience. Their question is, many cultures have long traditions of visionary art. How can practitioners respectfully draw from these traditions without appropriating them?
Great question. And that is why I always, even when I'm talking about contemporary modern art, I always make sure to identify that because it is important. So the question is, how do individuals integrate in creative practices from other cultures without appropriating, or how do practitioners, or how would somebody bring in any creative practice without appropriating? Does that clarification that I'm asking for make sense? Like
Yeah,
art making in general, or
yeah. Are you able
that?
to like touch on both?
Sure.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. In more, I can speak to how me and my team approaches this, and I can speak to myself. There is not a single thing that I have been a part of publishing that does not have this point of acknowledgement and does not center that I am in a white Western theoretical therapeutic container. And that is what I am speaking to, and that Indigenous communities have been doing this. So that I think is one important piece, the acknowledgement, the celebration. And in other presentations in the paper that Rebecca and I wrote, we work to speak to the actual cultural traditions, whether it's the Bwiti, the Kane tribe, or is it there's Kane the art. I'm not going to send myself too far down a rabbit hole with that and come back to the answer. Learning. I think learning about the cultural traditions, personally for me, I really try to stick to what is mine. I feel like that helps me stay. What that means is basic art materials and but acknowledging, appreciating, and purchasing directly from. I feel like psychedelic conferences have always been interesting edges for that, where can this actually be a place where we can route money to the cultures and traditions that are using art with non-ordinary states, but and inherently using art with creative practice, I would argue, isn't appropriation. So drawing that delineation, which circles back to what I was saying first, that it's innate to beings to alter our consciousness and use materials, but identifying particularly disenfranchised or oppressed communities and just acknowledging, seeing where we can reroute resources to. I think I ran in a circle enough there, but respecting and not taking what's not yours has worked for me thus far. And I think that's why I focus on art that is uh, not what you think of as typical visionary art. That was why I really wanted this presentation to divert even from the expectations of what a psychedelic art therapist would show you, right? Stepping away from, even though I love the visionary art tradition and I think it has so much to offer us, yeah, just expanding and the definition of what this means here now. So I'll stop talking so another question can be asked.
Yeah, we really appreciate just like this lens you bring to like creativity and the psychedelic like intersection here. Um, Another question we have is um what are some ways maybe persons who don't feel like they're creative can engage with art in a way that would be or like could be supportive for them
Mhm.
during altered states of consciousness. And this can include like psychedelics or like mindfulness or breath work. Like, what are some ways art could be like engaged with?
I love this question. And the first thing that comes up for me is just simply having them available. What a teacher of mine taught me is have them visible, whether that be often, and I'll have a, let's say I'm traveling or I want to share art supplies, I'll always try to have either an open basket, a clear box. In my therapy office, we have open shelves and they're organized. I think that a part of the preparatory process can just be learning about what supplies you might be interested in. There are, I don't know if these exist in all cities, but I used to live in Boulder and I sort of now still live in Portland, but there's art material like reuse stores. So people who feel done with art supplies, like an art supply thrift store is pretty much what I'm saying. If sometimes the investment can be a lot for people, so finding ways to get art supplies cheaper without necessarily having to compromise on quality can be something to think about. And I always use the expression art speed dating. And what art speed dating means is how can you, just by yourself, with a group of friends, altered, non-altered, just play with a material for 5 minutes and learning what you like. Often when I teach, I give an example of continuums of fluid to restrictive. So just beginning to understand what type of mediums would work for you. Something fluid is going to be like a watercolor or an acrylic paint, while something more rigid or restricted will be pens, pencils, colored pencils, and in the middle is going to be a pastel, where it's you have some sense of motor control, but you can still blend it, for example. So being willing to try. I often find that folks who are resistant to art making, if they can do it with a friend in a very passive way, that can be really helpful. But thinking about the basics of what sounds interesting to you, having it available, having them visible, seeing the preparation, the setting it up as a gift for future you. So on my art desk, I always have a blank piece of paper ready to go. So that way, future me, when I get home from work, if I have a bit of time in my day, there are as little barriers to entry to the creative process as possible. I literally, right here, right now, have my knitting bag with my project and a reach away. So just having things available so that way. Uh, the jump to bravery of trying it does not feel as scary. One of the studies that I pulled was saying how 22% of people who even looked at art experienced stress reduction. So really widening your definition of creativity too, of maybe even just going and looking at art could be a way to start, learn what are you even interested in. The big threads are care for future you and getting creative in terms of where you get supplies because they're available. There's so much more available. I mean, free boxes, thrift stores, art supplies, or art supply stores having sales and whatnot. But hopefully that touches on how you start a couple different thoughts there. But I'll trust that this quote has been gotten, and I'll go back to my last
Yeah.
slide in case people didn't grab or want.
Thank you for that, Alyssa. Yes, and I've also posted your information
Perfect.
in the chat as well for our audience members.
Great.
Yeah, I really like thinking about art and creativity, just broadening your lens. I think that's really just like an important frame to have. So thank you for sharing that with us.
My
Um,
pleasure.
I think we can do one more question. Giannis, would you like to ask the other question we had?
Yes, sure. So the question is, do you think that art is just a translation of the unsayable, or is it really a fundamentally different language through which certain aspects of human experience can only be known or recognized rather than explained, by example, through
Mm.
words?
Okay. Can you say the beginning part again?
So do you think art is a translation of the unsayable? So basically where language stops and limits us, or is it
Yeah. Or is it?
Or is it a fundamentally different language through which certain aspects of human experience can only be known or recognized rather than explained by these words we normally use or symbols?
Hmm. This is going to be such an annoying answer, but yes, I think it's both, right? I feel like there are scenarios in which both feel very true to me throughout my experience as an artist of ineffability, right? Sometimes a creative process that the example that I had shown of the large Richard Serra pieces, those that like did something to my physiology in a way that did feel beyond language. And my art therapist brain could also sit down and unpack and translate. And an art therapist can't just like look at your art and know everything about you, but it's rather this call and response process. So I think that there is a place where it is both, where sometimes something so profound is transmitted, communicated, shared, that it's consciousness altering. Like I am a different person in this moment after seeing that thing or creating that thing. But if I slow down enough, there's always a way to be curious enough to find personal insight, which is why, yeah, my the inclusive part of me is like, yes, and
Thank you, Alyssa.
Oh, my
Uh,
pleasure.
we plan on sending all of our keynotes email after the conference with all the list of questions that were asked, so you'll have
Okay.
them.
That's so
Um,
helpful.
yeah, and just in closing, is there anything else you would like to share with us today?
If this interests you, come find us. The Psychedelic Art Therapy Network is a nascent organization, and I'm just excited to keep building community. I hope that you find a way to be creative in whatever way that looks like for you. And yeah, just really thank you for having me and inviting me. Like I said, it's very sweet and full circle as my psychedelic speaking career started in college. So we're available. Please make more art. And thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Alyssa.
My pleasure.